all this way the Supreme Court, and certainly the Supreme Court didn't agree with my colleagues. And so I think that has to be called out. So I call it out. I do want to ask this. There seems to be a contradiction in what some of you have been saying today. It's interesting. If you listen to what some of you said, says the government has a whole bunch of information and they ought to give it to us. And sometimes in real time so we can help them solve this fraud problem. And then I hear from somebody else saying the government has too much information, and this information, in fact, could be hacked, and then that would be very detrimental to us. I mean, it seems that that's what I heard. Did I not hear that? I mean, let me go first to Mr. Brabant. I mean, it sounded to me like you were saying you're not confident with some of the information the government holds.
Yeah, absolutely. If the beneficial ownership information database went forward, to have over 32 million driver's license photocopies of small business owners, which would make it a hacker's dream to get that information from an identity theft perspective.
Right. In fact, we see right now a lot of the complaints that we're getting about DOJ is they're trying to get into people's private information that no one knows why they need it. And then it seems, and not for a negative purpose, you guys want to stop fraud, but it seems like you're saying the federal government has a whole bunch of information and we'd like to have it in real time so we can stop this fraud. Well, it seems like it potentially could be a massive invasion of privacy. How do you reconcile that? Yes.
Thank you for the question. The folks that I represent, the thousands of dedicated anti-money laundering and fraud professionals, care for our customers' data just as much as everybody else in the industry. However, we have a responsibility to our customers to collect data and collect illicit threats on our customers to do things like transaction monitoring.
Well, no one disagrees with that, but I have to tell you, I come from the perspective that I think banks try to do the right thing with this information. I don't think they want their clients to be defrauded. I don't believe that at all. I think you guys are trying hard. But I'm not one of these guys that thinks the government are the bad people either. I think the government attempts to do the right things too. Sometimes it falters like anybody else. But it does seem like you're asking for a lot of information, private information, that a lot of people would have a problem with you having, especially, in fact, I'm kind of surprised some of my colleagues on the other side didn't call that out. They're usually pretty good about this privacy stuff. But I mean, it seems like you're saying, hey, give us a whole bunch of this information back. I mean, isn't there a conflict there?
Again, thank you for the question. It's not a conflict from the financial crimes perspective. We, as financial institutions, collect a lot of sensitive information on our customers already to establish a reasonable belief in that customer's identity. The information I'm looking to, and my folks in my industry are looking to partner with, is a secure transmission of information that has been used in a financial crime outside of the institution that we are employed by.
No, I get that. I get that. The government has a lot of information. You'd like some of that too. And I mean, I don't know. It seems to me that could be a massive invasion of privacy. I'm surprised that my colleagues on the other side haven't called that out. I do want to say one thing, though. You talked about the financial fraud with the farmer. If the CFPB was still in order, we could still go after that. In fact, right now when they're calling about fraud, no one answers the damn phone. So we have elderly people, we have people in the military, veterans in San Diego that call the CFPB, and there's nobody on the other side of the line. And that's a problem. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Texas, also the chairman of the Small Business Committee. Mr. Williams is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Ms. Burns Koven, we are seeing an evolution in how fraud is being committed and concealed, particularly through the use of emerging technologies like decentralized exchanges and cryptocurrencies. These tools are not only being exploited by traditional scammers behind investment funds and pig butchering schemes, but increasingly by sophisticated transnational criminal organizations, including Mexican drug cartels that are adapting their tactics to evade the detection. In many cases, these groups are bleeding fraud proceeds with other illicit revenue streams and using crypto infrastructure to obscure the origin and flow of funds. Now, from your advantage, what trends are you seeing in how fraudsters, both individual and organized, are using these technologies to evade AML controls? And how is your organization working with the private sector and law enforcement to stay ahead of these evolving threats and ensuring we can continue to track down these criminals effectively?
Thank you for the question. And we're able to track these cartels purchasing fentanyl precursors from Chinese dealers who are primarily operating in cryptocurrency. We're seeing illicit actors adopt cryptocurrency for the same reason it's being used for legitimate purposes, because it's stable, it's liquid, it's fast. Any technology we can count on fraudsters to abuse. And luckily, we've been able to track some of these fentanyl dealers and Mexican cartels, but they're early stage in cryptocurrency, and they are not expert launderers, which provides excellent opportunity for intervention. I want to highlight the Eastern District of Wisconsin for forfeiting $5.5 million in cryptocurrency associated with cartels and Chinese fentanyl precursor dealers. So there's a number of cases where we see this over and over at the federal and state and local level, and we need to make sure that state and local investigators are equipped to be able to identify and track these payments.
Okay, thank you. One particular area of concern of mine is how government-related reporting requirements such as FinCEN's beneficial ownership information rule may be putting small businesses and their owners at risk. The rollout of BOI reporting under the Corporate Transparency Act has required millions of small businesses to navigate a complex new federal compliance system, often for the first time. Unfortunately, bad actors are using the requirements of the rule to exploit business owners through emails, fraudulent websites, and scam calls impersonating FinCEN. I applaud the Trump administration for scaling back its harmful requirement, recognizing the disproportionate burden and security risks that this rule has placed on small businesses, but there are still bad actors we must protect small businesses and entrepreneurs from. So, Mr. Brabant, how has FinCEN's BOI reporting requirements opened up small businesses to the threat of fraud and scams, and how can Congress better protect small business owners from BOI-related fraud?
Thank you, Congressman. The first one I discussed earlier is filing scams themselves. When you do a Google search, the first several results are not going to be from FinCEN. They're going to be from BOIR.org, who has what looks to be a government seal with an eagle in it. And some of these sites are charging $400 to file, and then small business owners have no idea if their information's actually being filed. And then, of course, there is the question of when you have a copy of your driver's license in a database, and there's tens of millions of driver's licenses in there, it's only a matter of time until that information is leaked or hacked, and that opens up significant identity theft risks.
Thank you. I've got limited time, but Mr. McLaughlin, could you elaborate on how the current filing burden of SARs and CTRs are affecting community banks, and how can Congress provide financial institutions some relief from these burdens while still giving law enforcement the information and tools that they need?
Thank you for your question. I think the burden needs to be shifted to a risk-based approach that's in an alignment between regulatory agencies, law enforcement, and the financial institutions. Check-the-box exercises are a drain on resources across the industry, and it's demoralizing to the institution, the folks that I represent, that we are not focusing on the threat, the real threat, to our customers, but rather we are taking part in check-the-box exercises to get the machine of filing SARs or CTRs out within the regulatory expected SLAs.
Okay, thank you. I have Lee on my time back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, and the gentleman from Illinois, who's the ranking member of the Financial Institutions Subcommittee, Mr. Foster, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses. I'd like to talk a little bit about identity fraud and particularly the role of digital identity systems and maybe ameliorating some of that. You know, states like Louisiana are using digital driver's license to keep kids off porn websites and things like that. And so I guess my first question, Ms. Stokes, what fraction of the frauds really at some point against seniors involve identity fraud, where someone's representing themselves online as someone who they're not?
Thank you for that question, Representative. It kind of goes two ways. So identities that have been stolen and used fraudulently can be used for a whole range of things. But when we're talking about what's happening online, people don't need a stolen identity to pretend who they are. I mean, it's too easy. You can create.
So I guess, yeah, the question is that if it became sort of standard practice, when someone contacts you, sends you an email, text message, contacts you with social media, to just give a little token that says, here is the proof that I am the legally traceable person.
Yes, thank you, Representative. And there are activities underway in the industry to try to come to that, and I would think that would benefit everybody.
Yeah, just, it seems like when, I guess, one of you mentioned the error message on the screen that sort of triggered a big relationship that was just completely fraudulent. And if it became standard practice, and then you can contact me, someone can send me an anonymous text, and I'll just assume it's coming from some AI-generated trash. But if they're willing to identify themselves, then I'll pick it up even if I don't recognize the name. And it seems that's a much healthier way to end up with this wave of identity fraud that we're seeing. Now, another thing, a lot of you have mentioned the need to catch this at the front door and the use of technology. And one of the new pieces of technology that may become important are these AI personal assistants and companions that are really, in some cases, even simple robots that seniors fall in love with when they get into memory care situations. Or just, the taxi driver I know spends his day in conversation with an AI, asking him questions about, sports scores or how the wildfire's doing. And it seems like an entity like that, if properly designed and regulated, could be sort of looking over the shoulder of elders as they're on the internet and saying, hey, this AI personal assistant, which is being rolled out by dozens of AI companies, could, if done right, really be the first line of defense against this. And is anyone aware of something like this that is under development or being marketed that way?
Thank you, Representative. I'm not aware of those. I'm sure that's out there, but we have grave concern about the misuse of generative artificial intelligence.
Well, this would be an AI on your side. Right? This would be a product provided to that person whose job it was to defend that person against the wave of garbage out, AI-generated garbage on the internet. And so it seems like there may be something there, and it would be an interesting project for a nonprofit, for example, or just a company to think about developing, because that, what you'd really love is that if every senior on the planet had a benevolent advisor looking over their shoulder and saying, I'm very familiar with the millions of frauds that exist. And what you just are getting here on your screen looks a whole lot like a fraud I've seen 1,000 times before. And that can be done, it seems, with properly regulated AI assistance. And it seems like that's a real opportunity. So any thoughts you had on that or anything that you're aware of being developed, I'd be interested. So let's see, I guess Representative Vargas made the point I wanted to make about the tension between knowledge sharing and privacy. Because when you're talking about knowledge, you're talking about knowledge of things where there's no warrant and not necessarily probable cause, but if you see the whole picture, you can assemble the probable cause. And it seems like that's very sensitive legal grounds, legal territory, to try to figure out how to strike that balance. We have to make sure that as politicians, we're not sort of making too inconsistent requests of whatever legal system we set up for that. Anyway, I guess that's, last quick question. What fraction of the Bybit hack money has been recovered, the $1.5 billion North Korean? What fraction has been successfully laundered?
Thank you for the question. I'm not familiar with the current stats. This is an ongoing investigation, but Chainalysis has aided the recovery of $40 million to date of that.
Okay, but at 1.5, big part of it has been successfully laundered and is lost forever. Is that correct?
It is ongoing, sir.
All right. Thank you. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kim, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Recently, I've been really concerned about the role that the Wei1 group plays in cyber scam operations. Ms. Koven, I know that Chainalysis played a very sizable role in exposing the group's illicit activity. So can you break down what exactly your research found?
Thank you for the question. So we've been tracking Huihuan for a long time, and since 2021, Huihuan has processed $70 billion worth of cryptocurrency. Huihuan Guarantee operates as a peer-to-peer marketplace, allowing vendors and buyers to connect. It receives a profit, a fee from those transactions, and these vendors are nakedly selling scam material, social media accounts, money mule services, and Huihuan also offers an exchange capacity. And it is the one-stop shop for scammers, giving them everything they need to conduct scams at scale for cheap.
You know, those that are critics of blockchain often paint it as a technology existing primarily to launder money or for other illicit activities. However, they fail to realize that the transparency that comes with a digital ledger can make it easier to identify and shut down bad actors. So, Ms. Koven, how did you leverage blockchain technology in your investigation? In what way, group?
So the blockchain reveals a very detailed story about Huihuan, way more granularity than we would ever have from traditional financial institution investigations. And it paints a very vivid picture of its illicit exposure. We see many of our scams are using Huihuan as a common denominator, the common place to launder, cash out funds, but also reinvest the proceeds of scams for additional materials used to target additional victims. And it provides a very powerful tool for financial institutions that leverage our platform for transaction monitoring, as well as investigative law enforcement to understand its inner workings.
So as we try to shut down organizations like the Huihuan group, do you think sanctions are an effective tool?
Sanctions are certainly a powerful tool, and one tool in the toolbox. I think more clarity would enable financial institutions and cryptocurrency businesses that leverage our data to understand if and when they have exposure, whether they have customers sending to or receiving funds from Huihuan. It essentially cuts Huihuan off from the mainstream crypto ecosystem.
Could you give us an example of how this was actually used and it was sanction was being effective?
Sanctions have been most effective when coordinated with law enforcement, that 1-2 punch of not only designations, but also takedowns. Just last month, Garantex, which is a sanctioned Russian service, persisted despite sanctions. Certainly, any cryptocurrency business with receiving from or to Garantex has the ability to block those transactions effectively. Mm-hmm. And what we're now examining is, because Garantex has been blacklisted, it's potentially rebranded. But it allows us to follow the money trail to identify that next iteration. Even when they're in jurisdictions that are not compliant with Western law enforcement, we can still impose cost, we can inject friction.
Thank you. You know, I want to shift gears now and focus on the burden that suspicious activity reports have become on community financial institutions. So, Mr. McLaughlin, I want to ask you the questions. For community banks that have smaller regulatory teams, how much harder is it to complete the SARS with the level of details that is required?
Thank you for your question. So the burden on a smaller financial institution versus a larger institution is greater. At a larger financial institution, there's an investment in automation and other ways to make the investigative process and the SAR filing or CTR filing process more automated and faster. At the community bank or smaller financial institution level, the burden is on the person. The person has to basically write the who, what, where, when, how, and why the activity took place, and in great enough detail so that we're turning over SARS to the law enforcement that is considered actionable intelligence. We do not like getting feedback that we need to amend SARS or things like that to provide more data. So we look to provide as much data up front so the law enforcement can take it, but it is a very burdensome process because at that level of institution, there's not a lot of automation that takes place.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thanks, Ms. Kim. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLaughlin, first I just want to state the obvious. You currently have systems in place, right, to block, freeze, reject any transactions and report them to OFAC if they're done by shady characters, sanctions evaders, child traffickers. Is that a broad yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it. You'd be in trouble if you said anything else. Tomorrow, the committee is going to mark up stablecoin legislation, which would include language to treat stablecoin issuers as financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act, in which case they would also have to comply with anti-money laundering, know your customer rules that you comply with as well. Is it your view that stablecoin issuers should be subject to those same rules that you comply with, regardless of how those rules may change, that the rules shouldn't be different from one financial institution to another?
Thank you for your question. Yes, sir, I do believe any product, service, industry, or technology that is responsible for moving funds between customers or citizens has to be subject to regulation to make sure that they're protecting the customers or country.
Okay, and since you've presumably got some experience filing SARS reports and what have you, can you speculate on what the bad guys would do if we had a stablecoin regime where all of a sudden they weren't subject to the same rules that a depositor at your institution is subject to?
Thank you again. I could speculate that the bad guys would become even more aggressive in the space in terms of targeting vulnerable individuals to defraud, steal, and abuse the customers of the stablecoin.
Well, I certainly agree. I'm glad to hear you say it. And I raise that because some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle believe that stablecoin issuers should not have to comply with anti-money laundering rules. And I guess if you're here to represent our nation's child traffickers, that's a good position to have. But I think it's important that we make sure that we keep those protections. Ms. Koven, I want to move to you just to think about what might happen if we don't have those protections in place. My understanding from your from Chainalysis 2025 crime report is that stablecoins account for 63% of all illicit transactions that you had tracked, and that sanctioned entities are increasingly using stablecoins because of the difficulty of using the US dollar. Do I have that basically right on what your 2025 report said?
Yes, sir. Stablecoins have become the currency of blockchains. They are by far the most transacted cryptocurrency today. And we support efforts to establish regulatory frameworks across stablecoin issuers. Robust, consistent standards across this growing market can ensure.
But I appreciate that. But I just want to focus on the 63% of the illicit activity is done on stablecoins. And I want to understand that number because my understanding of what you can track is that you can't see the off-chain transactions, right?
Correct.
So it's 63% of the stuff that's trackable. But presumably, if the bad guys know what's trackable, it might be more than 63% if you could track everything.
As an investigator, for me personally, it is a gift when illicit actors decide to dabble in stablecoins because of the traceability and also seizability midstream.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I love the guy who robs 7-Eleven without a mask and holds his ID up to the camera before he pulls the gun out, right? But presumably there's more there. Now, I say that because if I am a bad guy and we don't regulate stablecoins, I can imagine a scenario where I go on to, I buy some other kind of crypto, I use that to launder money, I then bring that onto an exchange that's issuing the stablecoin, convert it to stablecoin. Those are all off-chain transactions, so you wouldn't see any of that, right? If that was the means of money laundering?
We've still had spectacular seizures, including a $225 million seizure of stablecoins associated with the scam funds. So scammers know it's visible and traceable, but are still taking the risk to dabble in it.
No, and I'm not saying this to criticize Chainalysis. Yeah. I'm just saying that because you're not tracking the off-chain, if I bought another crypto, went on to an exchange where the exchange was issuing this, because the exchanges run their own ledgers, right? And so you don't see that stuff,
yes,
right? And that's like, you'd mentioned Garantex earlier, but my understanding is that Garantex loves Tether because they can do all that sort of stuff and bypass the system. And even though hopefully we're clamping down on Garantex, you could still do that inside other exchanges and not track that, right?
Absolutely. That's why regulatory frameworks that put standards on those cryptocurrency businesses to understand all the swapping that's
Okay.
going on
Well,
are imperative.
I really appreciate your expertise. I'm out of time, and just a marker for tomorrow. Let's make sure we don't make things easier for the bad guys. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the witnesses. We're a new landscape is developed before us, and the bad actors have clearly figured out a way to thrive in that environment. So I want to go back to Huawei Yuan. Up until January, Apple and Google users on those two platforms could access. So Ms. Koven, when you look forward to one, what is currently the accessibility for Americans or Westerners to that platform and other platforms that may pose similar risks?
Yes, so we're seeing scam syndicates primarily leveraging these compounds. Huawei Yuan guarantee continues to be the common denominator for the majority of scams that we see, and including the laundering of scammed proceeds, as well as facilitating the tools and services needed to perpetrate the scam. Identities and data to contact and reach out to Americans for targeting of these confidence and pig butchering scams.
So if you could wave a magic wand, what would be your fix? What would be the defense, that firewall that we put up here to protect the end user, the Americans, from this type of scamming activity?
So Chainalysis has flagged Huawei Yuan in our product so that financial institutions with exposure to Huawei Yuan can make risk-based decisions on funds going to or coming from that platform. More regulatory pressure on institutions that are flagrantly abusing or flouting regulatory norms is important. Closing those gaps for AML standards is important because this jurisdictional arbitrage is certainly occurring.
Now, obviously, this is focused in China, but what about, are there other nation states that you have concerns about who are doing similar or learning from other bad actors and scaling up to, quite frankly, abuse Americans? My apologies.
Certainly, if Huawei Yuan didn't exist, there would be other jurisdictions, other services ready to take its place. And so we need to continue to use blockchain analytics to understand where these funds are going and where the illicit users wind up having success laundering funds.
Well, back to this platform, when you look at the child trafficking that's taking place and the movement of dollars, there's been, again, the bad actors have leveraged this technology to monetize the abuse of individuals, but in particular children. Again, what are next steps in combating that, being more aggressive in that space as this is becoming really a plague of our society?
So these scams are operated by organized criminal syndicates involved in not only scamming, but gambling, child trafficking, sex trafficking, and being able to find those centers of gravity, inject operational friction, deprive them of funds, the seizing funds, and also being able to cause them to be a pariah in the ecosystem is incredibly important. But we need that blockchain analytic capability to understand where the funds are going and identify those behind it.
So in other words, go after the money at the end of the day, right?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd love to get, when you talk about the regulatory regime that our colleague from the other side, I'd love to get your thoughts over the next my remaining time on what you envision as a regulatory regime for stablecoin, and quite frankly, the caution that we must, how we must proceed with caution, and so that we don't disrupt a marketplace that can be a benefit to the market, but at the same time, understanding that there's victims in the process.
Yeah, I think thanks for the dialogue here, but I think Mr. Kasten's concerns about illicit finance are well placed, and it highlights that the technology is changing. Stablecoins are a little different way. And that's why our witness from Chainalysis, I think you did a great job answering, hey, we like when things are on chain. We can follow it even easier. And when I'm talking about things in my other committee in foreign affairs, a lot of the things that we're looking at with non-state actors that are, circumventing our sanctions, which are things our committee does. doing those kinds of things on chain are more traceable in a lot of ways. That's exactly what we want. Sometimes we don't even want to turn off the flow of cash immediately. We want to be able to follow the flow so that we can actually target, in the case of warfare, kinetic targets. And then in the case of going after organized crime, we don't necessarily want the guy working out of mom's basement. We want to know who he's reporting to. And so the question is, are those tools better? We're going to talk about that in a lot of ways. Thanks, Mr. Ogles. The gentleman's time's expired, and he's yielded. And the gentleman from California, Mr. Liccardo, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for all this information. The hearing, of course, is captioned "Follow the Money," and I used to be involved in prosecuting drug traffickers and human trafficking as a federal prosecutor and later as a DA. And certainly I had plenty of challenges following the money when we knew there was information being provided by entities that was false, that would conceal who the actors were and who was controlling them, and most importantly, who was getting the money from the criminal enterprise, because we knew those were the folks who were really running the show. I'll give you a quick example. We had, I remember, a Cuban national who was controlling a major human trafficking enterprise in Southern California, of course, using entirely U.S. corporations filed under California and other states' laws with U.S. citizens, essentially, ostensibly being their officers. So I'm concerned, as I know the National District Attorneys Association is also concerned, based on what we see from their statement in December of 2024, at this legislation that we're currently considering that would exempt every U.S. corporation under a certain threshold size from Corporate Transparency Act's requirements providing basic basic ownership information to FinCEN. And let's be clear about what that information is under the law. It's the name of the owner, their date of birth, their address, and some identifying number from a driver's license or passport or some other government. That's it, 4 items. Now, in my experience, certainly trying to get the identity of those individuals controlling these entities that are engaged in criminal activity was pretty important. And I guess I just wanted to ask Stokes, does it help, based on your experience, to be able to have this kind of information if we're trying to combat fraud?
Thank you, Representative. Absolutely, the information is critical. And I just want to point out that we've heard a lot about concerns of administrative burden and concerns of data privacy. I want to turn to the burden of the victim. When you look in the aggregate of how much has been stolen just in 2023, an estimate from the FTC, $158.3 billion, that is 3 times the revenue of the Coca-Cola Company. We have to understand that, yes, there are burdens on businesses, and maybe some could be put together better than others, but we can't be moving away from rules that help protect consumers.
I agree, Ms. Stokes. And in fact, I believe Mr. Brabant suggested somehow or another corporations have to hire CPAs and outside counsel to be able to submit this information about the name of the owner, the date of birth, address, and their basic driver's license number. Is that your experience, that you need outside counsel to do such things?
Thank you, Representative. I can't speak to that because that's not the space I work in, but I hear your point.
Yeah, so $153 billion in loss.
$158 billion.
$158 billion. Thank you for that. Mr. Brabant, you might have guessed I was going to you next. I'm trying to understand why providing these 4 basic pieces of information, which, by the way, I had to provide when I opened an LLC last year. Any bank would require it. It's pretty basic information. What is the extraordinary burden involved here?
It's also a photocopy of a driver's license, but it's that information. The challenge is a substantial control prong. And I think one thing that's getting lost here is that every bank already has this. So this is a duplication of the customer due diligence rule, which already exists. So every single LLC that has a bank, if the bank is doing its job, they have this information. What this is really
What
about
happens
is
if the
FBI
bank has
doesn't want to get
individuals who are involved in the criminal activity? Wouldn't you want that information in the hands of those who are investigating criminal activity, not those who may be
Anyone
complicit?
who's investigating could subpoena the bank for it at any time.
And what happens if you're just investigating for the first time? And you actually need to know who you can subpoena. You don't know exactly where to go because you don't have ownership information to begin with. I mean, you raise concerns, for example, about criminal threats to these companies, but in fact, the law is very clear under Title 31. Penalties only accrue if you're fraudulently reporting this information, willfully and fraudulently reporting information that is false. And somehow or another, you've cast this as some kind of great criminalization of corporate America. How can that be?
That's a knowing and willing standard, which is usually in the eye of a prosecutor.
Not knowing and willing. It says willfully provide false or fraudulent. That's what the statute says. Not knowing, it says willfully. Let's be very clear about what the statute says.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Salazar, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. My name is Maria Salazar. I represent the District Number 27 in Florida, which includes the city of Miami. And for what I've been studying, my hometown was ranked #1 in the nation with the highest per capita fraud in the country. That cost Floridians over $850 million. That is, and Miami is a great place, but this is pretty embarrassing. So I would like to ask Mr. McLaughlin if you could please explain to us why, according to the FTC fraud report, Miami is #1 in the nation for reported fraud. Why is that? Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you for your question. I
Yes.
can't really answer as to why Miami in particular is ranked #1, but I can tell you that the financial institutions today that I've had the honor of working with and partnering with have dedicated time, energy, and more importantly, resources to developing upfront detection of fraud. However,
Is there any specific reason why that area in the country, specifically the city of Miami, is the #1 in the country for fraud? What are we attracting?
If I would have to take a guess, it is the population of the potential vulnerable population that resides within the state of Florida. Also, the availability of being able to reach Miami from a foreign country also would probably play a part in that, having the ability to contact an elder in Miami and talk about investment opportunities maybe in their home country. It exists greater than in other large areas of the country. Again, that's just me taking a guess using my experience over time, but my fellow witnesses may have a better answer than I.
Maybe Mrs. Koven, would you like to give us maybe your opinion as to why the city that I represent is #1 for fraud in the country?
I'm unfamiliar with Miami in particular, but from my experience, scammers are targeting Americans indiscriminately and are looking to develop relationships with individuals over texts and social media, and very happy to have their hands on American data to strike up those conversations, because America is a target-rich environment. It is a wealthy country, and it makes it a prime target for these fraudsters.
So any additional tools, any of you that would like to share with us, any additional tools or ideas that we should consider in order to stop this or make it a lot harder for these scammers to attack our constituents?
If I may, Representative?
Of course.
One of the points that was made a little bit earlier, I think the targeting does have a lot to do where older populations are. And if you broaden your look beyond Miami, you'll see probably the top 5 states are where the highest number of older adults live. It's not that they just target older adults, but when they get the older adult, there's a much bigger payout because they have the assets, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is that, this is organized crime, and our system of law enforcement just isn't resourced or isn't able, because of other competing demands, to look at these crimes through an organized crime lens. And if you did, you would get the $10,000 grandparent scam in Miami connected to the $10,000 grandparent scam in Tennessee, and all of a sudden, it's $1 million threshold breaking case. And there's a new initiative underway that will launch in April that's going to do just this, the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center. And I'd love to tell you more about that if you're interested.
Yeah, well, so that basically what you're telling us is that we are going to be honing on and targeting the senior population to explain to them or to send the message to be very careful. So that means that our seniors do not understand that they are the number one prey for this type of scammers.
Thank you, Representative. I can tell you my job is to educate older Americans, and within 2 years of doing this, I realized we cannot educate our way out of this. And NFC isn't about educating, it's about pulling data together from the private and public sectors to
We
solve.
cannot educate them. I mean, my time is up, but just give me 30 seconds. Why do you think education is not the way to go with the senior population?
We've been saying education is the answer for years, and where are we? The $158.3 billion, $61.5 billion of which was stolen from older adults in 2023, it can't work on its own. And because we've relied on that, it's served to deprioritize any other activity that could have gone to mitigate the loss that's now growing so meteorically.
Thank you. You back.
Thank you. Appreciate the dialogue there. And the gentlewoman from Michigan, the chairwoman, also the chairwoman of the full Republican Conference, Ms. McLean from Michigan, is now recognized.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. This is a really important topic, I think, and something that I think we really need to figure out how to get our arms around. So again, appreciate for you holding the hearing as well as talking about this. I want to start with Ms. Koven. And I'm trying to understand blockchain, the role it plays, but could blockchain analytics or other technological solutions, so to speak, streamline the filing and analysis of SARs and CTRs? And if the answer is yes, which I hope it is, could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, thank you for the question. Blockchain analytics already is enriching SAR and CTR quality. Our customers from private sector are leveraging the insights from our data to file their SARs and CTRs today. It paints a very vivid picture of the entire kill chain of events. So if we're talking about scams in particular, you have a much vivid color of where the funds are going and coming from, counterparties as well, much more so than you would in the traditional financial industry.
And is the timing a lot quicker as well, I'm assuming?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Cryptocurrency is an attractive asset for legitimate uses as well as illicit for its speed of transaction.
I mean, in my opinion, we have all these government or agencies and we have these rules and regulations, and at times they're so cumbersome and at times overburdening for the businesses where I think the businesses are trying to do the right thing and people are trying to do the right thing. It's just the volume is so immense, right, that it just takes time to go through that. So one of the biggest advantages I see, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, is the time, because to your point, the timing is crucial on when we find these. Could you talk a little bit about the timing of this and the time frame, how the time frame is shortened?
Yes, so we also provide real-time transaction monitoring, allowing financial institutions to get alerts on funds incoming or going off their platform, and they can be alerted in real time to these funds. So really time is at the essence, and current processes, reporting, information sharing is painfully slow. And even though cryptocurrency and the blockchain enable tracing and freezing, time is really at the essence. We have to make sure that those insights are delivered in a timely fashion.
Do you have any measurables on that?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right, just curious. Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, how can FinCEN improve its communication and feedback mechanisms with banks and blockchain analytics firms following SARS and CTR submissions? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and thank you for your question. As everybody could probably tell, the point of a lot of the things I've said today is creating an open and transparent two-way communication between the public and private sector so that we could begin focusing the resources that we have on the threats that our customers face on a daily basis. So working with FinCEN to establish a working group or a task force or whatever terminology you want to throw at it, would allow us to begin establishing and doing data analytics on what the government is seeing, what law enforcement is seeing, and what the private sector is seeing, so that we can begin putting pen to paper on what a true risk-based approach means for financial crimes across the board: fraud, money laundering, sanctions, and terrorism finance.
Are you getting any pushback or running into any roadblocks on that?
I wouldn't say roadblocks or pushback. I think with the increased scrutiny that all of you are bringing to light today, I do think we are seeing across the industry a knowledge sharing exercise taking place, whether that be informally or formally. But more work is needed. I think when we look at things like the FFIEC manual and the revisions there, I do think a public, private, and law enforcement type engagement would allow us to put down what the actual requirements are, so that we could point to the crimes that we're trying to capture.
And are you getting any pushback on that public-private partnerships?
Personally, with the folks that I work with, no, it's just not official. It's, it's at, outside the hallways here or at a convention or a conference that knowledge sharing really exists.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Iowa is also the vice chairman of the committee. Mr. Nunn is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for putting this important hearing together today. We all know that in my home state of Iowa, in the heart of the heartland, my senior citizens are probably target number one for the scams. It's happening across not just Iowa, but the entire country. I'm proud to say that the U.S. is also probably the best place for innovators to come to the forefront and really be the superheroes in the story of fighting back. In November, the Department of Justice used blockchain to freeze approximately $225 million that were used in a human trafficking scheme. However, even amongst this technological situation, we remain challenged for most of our state and local law enforcement entities to get an opportunity to play, as Mr. McLaughlin, you just highlighted. One victim back in my hometown in Iowa, a 68-year-old veteran, lost over $100,000 to a scam. And challengingly, local law enforcement couldn't even begin to help. That's why today, Mr. Chair, I'm introducing the Bipartisan GUARD Act to give state and local law enforcement agencies access to the technology they need to combat these financial fraud, crimes, and pig butchering scams. So let's get started on this. Ms. Cohen, I know that you and I are on the same page here because in your testimony, you emphasize the need to train more people on things like blockchain, those digital rails in which the future of technology is going to operate on here in the United States. This is exactly what the GUARD Act, my bill, attempts to accomplish. So I understand that your company has trained people on these technologies, both at the state and even down to the local level. Can you briefly walk us through some of the examples and if there's been stories of success here?
Yes, thank you for the question, and I'm sorry to hear about your constituent being defrauded. It's a story we hear all too often, unfortunately. At Chainalysis, though, we do work with over 70 state and local governments around the country, and we have seen astounding successes when law enforcement is trained and equipped properly. And we have only scratched the surface, unfortunately. And particularly with the proliferation of these types of scams, we need to better equip state and local law enforcement to understand how to handle these cases and connect a single fraud victim to a wider network and increase chances of disruption and recovery.
Jackie, I think you really highlight a point here that this has happened in the physical world before, and we've had good game plans to go after it. You know, what our GUARD Act bill is aiming to do is to create these fusion centers of best practices at the federal level, marry them up with local law enforcement agencies, and provide those level of resources to really go after that so that, you know, an Iowan who loses 100,000 or a New Yorker who loses $1 million all have the same access to the same resources. Is this what you've seen through your experience to be a successful solution?
Yes, sir. We should have every advantage because these scammers are leveraging cryptocurrency, but time is at the essence. And what we have seen in working groups and small-scale operations is that when private and public sector are together, sharing information dynamically, we can turn that wealth of information into actionable insights quickly and have stunning successes.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Ms. Stokes, I want to thank you and your incredible team at AARP. You're on the front line not only guarding our seniors, but you've helped bridge this to be a bipartisan effort. Our GUARD Act is really brought together by Mr. Gottheimer and myself, a Republican and a Democrat, but really working for the best interest of the American people here. I'd like to, one, ask how could retirees benefit from a local law enforcement that would have access to these greater tools that a GUARD Act could provide so they can get to know about blockchain, understand how financial fraud works, and really address the sources of these crimes to stop the number of victims we're seeing?
Thank you, Representative, and AARP is very proud to support the GUARD Act. I think it's critical. We talk to probably 100,000 victims a year, maybe 500 calls a day, and the vast majority of fraud victims where money has been stolen, they have no recourse. They'll call local or state police, and even if police that they talk to understand that it's a crime, they'll still say, there's nothing we can do about it. That's right. And sometimes don't even take the report, which is a challenge in and of itself. So anything that we can do to not only provide the tools, but importantly to train local and state law enforcement on things that they simply don't have the training on right now would be of great benefit to our constituency.
Well, thank you, Ms. Stokes. I want to again say thank you to AARP for helping lead this, because it's not only my seniors who want this, it's every American who needs this, and no one more so than my local law enforcement who want to be able to help our own community get better. This gets us in the right direction. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you very much. I thank all of our witnesses and our colleagues for a great hearing today. Kind of scary what's going on for the citizens of this country. Hopefully this will help make a difference. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions to the witnesses and to the chairman for questions. Witnesses, please, if you get those, respond no later than May 6th. And this hearing is now adjourned.